What if I told you that some of the most dramatic rescues of American lives depended on a quiet neighbor to the north? From shielding U.S. diplomats in Tehran, to housing stranded passengers on 9/11, to sending crews into California's wildfires. This is the story of Canada's reputation as the world's steady helper. In the next few minutes, we'll trace how a country often seen as polite and peaceful has repeatedly stepped up when it mattered most for the United States and beyond. Canada's global reputation is built on something simple but powerful. When disaster hits, they show up. Not with a lot of fanfare, not with loud speeches, but with planes, firefighters, ships, and peacekeepers. In this video, we'll look at moments where Canada quietly had America's back during terrorist attacks, raging wildfires, brutal hurricanes, and even Cold War hostage crises, plus how Canadian forces help keep North America safe every single day through NORAD and UN peacekeeping. Let's start with the story that Hollywood turned into a thriller: the Canadian Caper. In 1979, after the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was overrun, 6 American diplomats escaped and went into hiding. It was Canada that quietly took them in. Canadian diplomats sheltered them in their own homes, and the Canadian government worked with the CIA to create fake identities and documents. Under the cover of a phony movie production, the Americans walked through the airport using Canadian passports and flew to safety. The risk for those Canadians was enormous. If caught, they could have been imprisoned or killed. Yet, they did it anyway. What made this operation so remarkable wasn't just the clever cover story. It was the fact that Canada was willing to put its entire diplomatic relationship with Iran and potentially Canadian lives on the line for 6 Americans. When the mission succeeded, the world found out just how far Canada had gone to protect its ally. The Canadian Caper became a symbol of Canada's quiet courage, and it set a tone for how the country would be seen in future crises. Discreet, dependable, and willing to take risks to save lives. Fast forward to September 11, 2001, when U.S. airspace suddenly shut down. More than 200 planes were ordered to land immediately. Many of them had nowhere to go until Canada opened its airports. In the small town of Gander, Newfoundland, a community of fewer than 10,000 people welcomed nearly 7,000 stranded passengers. Schools, churches, and homes turned into makeshift shelters. Families brought food, clothing, and even phones so strangers could call their loved ones. It wasn't a grand geopolitical maneuver. It was simple human kindness on a massive scale. Stories from Gander tell of strangers arriving scared and confused and leaving with lifelong friendships. People opened their homes, supermarkets donated food, and local bus drivers who were on strike returned to work just to help. For many Americans, 9/11 is remembered with images of fear and loss. But thanks to places like Gander, it's also remembered with images of Canadians quietly saying, "You can stay with us as long as you need." That hospitality left a deep imprint on how Americans saw their northern neighbor. Beyond moments of terror, Canada has repeatedly stepped in when nature hits the United States hard. After major hurricanes like Katrina, Canadian ships, helicopters, and medical teams moved south to help devastated American cities. Navy vessels sailed into the Gulf of Mexico. Search and rescue teams joined in evacuations, and Canadian doctors helped treat the injured. For Canada, the logic was simple. When your neighbor's house is flooding, you don't ask about politics, you grab a bucket. That same instinct showed up in 2006, when conflict in Lebanon suddenly trapped thousands of tourists and dual citizens. Canada undertook one of the largest evacuations in its modern history, sending ships to help not only Canadians but also stranded Americans get out of a war zone. While the U.S. organized its own operations, Canadian vessels and diplomats were often right there alongside them, working the ports, organizing manifests, and getting families onto safer shores. Canada's support isn't just reactive. Through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, Canadian and American forces work side by side every day to detect and intercept potential threats from the skies and seas. In concrete terms, that means Canadian pilots scrambling jets when something suspicious appears on radar, sharing intelligence 24/7, and coordinating patrols over the vast Arctic and North Atlantic. Most people never hear about these missions precisely because they're successful. Quietly, they form a shield that protects both countries. Globally, Canada's reputation has also been shaped by its long-standing role in UN peacekeeping. Canadian soldiers in blue helmets have been sent into conflict zones not to conquer territory, but to stand between warring sides, protect civilians, and enforce fragile ceasefires. While peacekeeping has evolved and Canada's level of involvement has gone up and down, the image of the Canadian soldier as a calm, trustworthy presence has stuck in the world's imagination. That peacekeeper identity helps explain why, when Americans or others are in trouble, Canada is often seen as a reliable, low-drama partner. Taken together, these moments Tehran, Gander, hurricane zones, Lebanon, NORAD patrols, and UN peacekeeping build a consistent picture. Canada isn't perfect, and it has its own internal challenges and controversies. But on the world stage, its reputation with Americans and many others rests on a pattern. When there's a crisis, Canada tends to show up, to share risk, and to offer refuge. It's the ally that calls you back, sends the plane, or opens the door when you have nowhere else to land. If you'd like to dive deeper into these stories, from the Canadian Caper to NORAD's modern missions, check out the longer documentaries and sources I've linked below. And if you want more in-depth looks at how countries shape their reputations through actions, not words, hit subscribe and join me for the next episode.